I'll start with the first question I was asked by email. A lady wrote, I know we cannot live in a cave, but working in a stressful all-female environment does not bring out the best in people. It is very bitchy, gossipy, and people leave due to it being a toxic workplace. How can I use the teachings to survive and not let this behavior affect me? Is it about not connecting with their thought, speech, so I don't get stressed, upset by it? When we are troubled by the behavior of others, what actually is the cause of our being troubled is not just the behavior of others. The primary cause is our own likes and dislikes. In this context, it's very useful to bear in mind what Bhagavan says in the 19th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. What he says there is, there are not two minds, namely a good mind and a bad mind. Mind is only one. Only vasanas, that's inclinations, are of two kinds, namely subha, agreeable, virtuous or good, and asubha, disagreeable, wicked, harmful or bad. When the mind is under the sway of subha vasanas, it is said to be a good mind, and when it is under the sway of asubha vasanas, a bad mind. However bad other people may appear to be, disliking them is not appropriate. Likes and dislikes are both fit for one to dislike, or to spurn or renounce. It is not appropriate to let one's mind dwell excessively on worldly matters. To the extent possible, it is not appropriate to intrude in others' affairs. All that one gives to others, one is giving only to oneself. If one knew this truth, who indeed would remain without giving? The earlier part of this paragraph is particularly relevant here. That is, when we are living in this world, we have to interact with all sorts of people. And in our view, some people appear to be good people, some people appear to be bad people. But as Bhagavan says here, there are not two minds, namely a good mind and a bad mind. Mind is only one. That means mind itself is neither good nor bad. Mind is neutral. But the vasanas that exist within the mind, they are what make for, they are what influence the behavior of a person or drive the behavior of a person and make it appear that some people are bad and some people are good. And he says here, however bad other people may appear to be, disliking them is not proper. That is, we all naturally tend to like people we consider good and to dislike people we consider bad. But Bhagavan says likes and dislikes are both to be disliked. That is, we need to remain neutral. When we like a certain person, it is our, because we find certain qualities in people agreeable to us, we like those people. Because we find certain qualities in people disagreeable to us, we dislike them. But we should, if we need to be indifferent, both to the good and to the bad, both in terms of the good and bad we see in other people, and in terms of the events of our life. We consider some events in life to be good, favorable events, some events to be bad. But we need to rise above likes and dislikes. So long as we have likes and dislikes, so long as so long as our mind is going outwards, we will have likes and dislikes. Certain things, the things that make us happy, we like. The things that make us unhappy or prevent us being happy, we dislike. So it's because of the outward going nature of our own mind, in other words, our own Vishaya vasanas, that we have likes and dislikes. So when in Bhagavan's path, we are trying to turn our mind within more and more. The more we turn our mind within, the more we will be indifferent to whatever is happening outside. So often we are put in circumstances in life, whether in work situation or family situation or social situation, where we have to come across all sorts of people. Many of those people may be disagreeable to us. If someone is bitchy and gossipy, and it's not only women who are bitchy and gossipy, men can also be bitchy and gossipy. All male environments can also be toxic, maybe in different ways, but I mean, any social situation, anywhere where we have to deal with people, people have good qualities and may have bad qualities. We all have a mixture of subha and asubha vasanas. Maybe some of us have more subha vasanas, others have more asubha vasanas, but we've all got our own vasanas. We cannot change the vasanas of others, but we can change our own vasanas. And that's what we need to be doing. By turning our mind more and more within, we need to detach ourselves from the external world. We need to be outwardly, we need to continue according to our destiny, whatever be our destiny. We have to live in a certain circumstances. But inwardly, we need to learn to be detached. So sometimes when we're in what seems to be an unfavorable environment, from a worldly point of view, it may be unfavorable. But from a spiritual point of view, often what seems to be unfavorable is actually favorable, because it is, when we're in a difficult situation, it is a good training ground for us in learning to be detached, in learning to be indifferent, in learning to hold on to I am, even in the midst of whatever may be happening externally. So the question is, how can I use the teachings to survive and not let this behavior affect me? Bhagavan's teachings are all about turning our attention within and thereby surrendering ourselves. So the more we turn our attention within, the more ego subsides. And the more ego subsides, the more its vasanas will also subside. If we allow ego to rise, it will wander under the sway of its vasanas. But if we constantly keeping ego in check by clinging firmly to self-attentiveness, we thereby keep the vasanas in check, and we won't be affected by whatever may be happening outside. In the next paragraph, in the 20th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, what Bhagavan says is also very relevant. If oneself rises, everything rises. Here, what he means by oneself is oneself as ego. If we rise as ego, everything else rises. If oneself subsides, everything subsides. That is, this whole world appears only when we rise as ego, is what those first two verses mean. So if you want to solve all the problem, the key is bringing about the subsidence of ego. Therefore, in the next sentence, the third sentence, he says, to whatever extent sinking low we behave, to that extent there is goodness. The key word here is sinking low. It's Tamil adverbial participle he uses here, tandu. Tandu means sinking, subsiding, being low. That implies, in this context, implies humility, but it implies more than humility in the normal sense of the term, humility in the true sense of the term, the subsidence of ego. So the more we keep ego in check, the more we bring about the subsidence of ego, to the extent that we bring about the subsidence of ego, to that extent it is good, is what Bhagavan says in the third sentence. And then in the fourth and last sentence, he says, if one is continuously restraining or curbing the mind, wherever one may be, one can be. So if you're able to keep your own mind in check, if you're able to prevent your rising of your own ego by not feeding your likes and dislikes, you can survive even in the most difficult of circumstances, in a toxic in a toxic work environment or toxic family environment or toxic social environment, we can remain unaffected to the extent that we keep our own mind we curb the rising of our mind or ego. So that is the key to it. So Bhagavan's teachings are very, very applicable in the circumstances in which you find yourself. You also ask, is it about not connecting with their thought, speech, so I don't get stressed upset by it? That is, if we give weight to what they may be saying or how they may be behaving, we will be affected by it. If we dislike their behavior or dislike their talk, that will affect us. If we want to remain unaffected by the way in which other people behave, or the way they talk, or it's by their behavior and their talks, we infer their thoughts. We don't actually see their thoughts. If we want to remain unaffected by their thought, speech, and work and actions, we need to free ourselves from likes and dislikes. We need to learn to be indifferent. What is it to us whether other people are good or bad? Why should that bother us? All we can do is curb the rising of our self as ego, curb the rising of our own mind. If we do that, however other people may be, we can peacefully live in their midst. I hope that adequately answers that question. Shalini, you've got your hand raised. Would you like to?
Yes, I do indeed, Michael. Yes, what I just wanted to clarify was, I thought it might be helpful for everybody. You spoke last time, I think it was, about the 5 koshas, the 5 sheaths.
Yes.
And I thought it was a very nice way of putting it, but I was wondering if you could explain that, but also explain the 5 koshas in terms of the experience of self-investigation, of self-inquiry, because it might be helpful. This is like saying, well, please tell us everything, yes. But
yes. It is. Okay. Yes. When people first hear about 5 sheaths, at first it seems an alien concept, but if we think about it, if we think deeply about what these terms mean, the 5 sheaths are said to be Annamaya kosha. That's the sheath composed of food. That is the physical body. Pranamaya kosha means the sheath composed of life, or prana. We all know this. The body we now experience as I is not a dead body; it's a living body. So there's life in this body. So we've got the physical body, we've got life. Manomaya kosha means the sheath composed of mind. However, it's distinguished from the intellect and the will in this context. So in this context, because the term mind is in different contexts, it's used in slightly different senses. In this context, mind means all the grosser functions of mind. That is the perceptions, memories, thoughts, feelings, all the grosser activity of the mind, all the aspects of the mind other than the intellect, the will, and ego. So that's the Manomaya kosha. Vijnanamaya kosha means the intellect. That's the judging, discriminating, distinguishing faculty of the mind. That's something we're all familiar with. The fifth sheath, which is actually, it's the most subtle, but it's usually, they go from gross to subtle. They're usually listed in this way. But actually, from our point of view, as ego, it's the closest sheath to us. The innermost sheath is will, is the Anandamaya kosha, then the Vijnanamaya kosha, then Manomaya kosha, then Pranamaya kosha, then Annamaya kosha. So the fifth sheath is Annamaya kosha. This is the sheath that it seems to me there's least clarity about this sheath. Generally, in ancient texts, it is said Annamaya kosha is the karana sarira, the causal body, and it's what remains in sleep. often these 5 sheaths are related to, are related to the, that is, they are connected to the 3 states, but in a way that is applicable to a certain analysis of the 3 states, but Bhagavan has given us a deeper analysis. So it's not actually applicable to what Bhagavan has taught us about the 3 states. That is, what is, that is, these 5 sheaths are divided into 3 bodies. The Annamaya Kosha, the physical body, is said to be the Stula Sarira, that's the gross body. The Pranamaya Kosha is sometimes classified along with the gross body, and sometimes it's classified along with the subtle body, but how it's classified doesn't really concern us. But generally, the Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, and Vijnanamaya Kosha, they are said to be the subtle body. And the Anandamaya Kosha is said to be the causal body. And it is said in the body that we experience as ourself in the waking state is the Stula Sarira. The body that we experience as ourself in the Stula Sarira means gross body. The body that we experience as ourself in dream is the Sukshma Sarira, the subtle body. And what remains in sleep is the Karana Sarira, the causal body. However, this doesn't really fit with what Bhagavan taught us, because Bhagavan taught us firstly that there's actually no substantive difference between waking and dream. So if our waking state is just another dream, the body we experience as ourselves in a dream, while we are dreaming, it seems to be just as gross, just as physical as this present physical body appears to be. So actually this distinction between the subtle body and gross body is not really applicable in Bhagavan's teaching, because Bhagavan gave a deeper analysis of the 3 states. Bhagavan didn't accept that there is any distinction between waking and dream. According to Bhagavan, waking, what we take to be waking, is just another dream. And even when we are dreaming, we assume we are awake while we are dreaming. It's only when we wake up from a dream when we say, oh, that was just a dream. So generally, in any dream, we seem to be awake. So because Bhagavan doesn't accept that distinction, which is taken for granted in a certain analysis of the 3 states, Bhagavan doesn't accept that distinction between dream and waking. This distinction between, this idea that in waking body we experience the Stula Sarira, the gross body as I, and in dream we experience the subtle body as I, that doesn't really stand. In verse 5 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan has said, Bhagavan said, Uḍḍal Pancha Kosa Uru. That means the body is a form composed of 5 sheaths. Adalal Aindum Uḍḍal Ennum Sollil Adongum. Therefore, all 5 are included in the term body. This is a very, very important teaching in the context of Bhagavan's overall teachings, because Bhagavan often said, ego is nothing but the false awareness, I am this body. When he says ego is the false awareness, I am this body, he's not just referring to the gross body, he's referring to all the 5 sheaths, because he says body is a form composed of 5 sheaths. That is, we never experience any of the 5 sheaths without experiencing all of them. That is, they are one bundle. We experience them collectively as I. Therefore, all the 5 are included in the term body. And then he says, Uḍḍal Andri Undo Ullahum. Without or excluding the body, has anyone, is there a world? And then he says, Uḍḍal Vittu Ullhate Kanda Ullaro. Leaving the body, is there anyone who has seen a world? So Bhagavan, these last 2 sentences, Bhagavan says 2 important things. Firstly, he says, that is, he uses different words. He said, first sentence, he says, Uḍḍal Andri. Andri means accept, or in this context, we can take it as without. In the second sentence, it says Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, which literally means leaving the body, but again, it implies without the body. So in both sentences, he's saying without the body. But in the first one, he says, without the body, is there a world? That is, does the world exist when we don't identify ourselves with the body? And in the second sentence, he says, without the body, has anyone seen the world? The implication here is, but the world doesn't actually exist except us, independent of our seeing it. That is, to put in philosophical terms, when he says, except the body, does the world exist? That is an ontological. Both of these are rhetorical questions, but they imply the world doesn't exist when we don't identify with the body. That's an ontological statement that's referring to the existence of the world. The second sentence is an epistemological question. Has anyone seen the world without the body? So the world appears to exist only when we identify ourselves with a body. And the body we identify with is a body consisting of 5 sheaths. So whenever we experience ourselves as a body, we're experiencing all the 5 sheaths. So as I say, the traditional or the most popular analysis of the 3 states and of these 3 bodies, what we find in most older texts, is not really applicable in Bhagavan's teachings. Moreover, Bhagavan has used the term subtle body in quite a different sense. In verse 24 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says the ego, the Chitta-granti, is one of the names for that is subtle body. So he's there using subtle body not to refer to 3 of these 5 sheaths, but ego, that which identifies all these 5 sheaths as I. Likewise, that's in verse 24 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. Likewise, in Nāṉ Ār, in the 4th paragraph, I think. Yes, in the last sentence of the 4th paragraph, he says, Maname sukshma sariram endrum jivan endrum solapadu. That means the mind alone is described as sukshma sarira, the subtle body, and jiva, the soul. So Bhagavan is using sukshma sarira here in quite a different sense to the sense in which it's normally used in the old in the more typical analysis of the 3 states. So I've said what Bhagavan said about waking and dream. Regarding sleep, whereas sleep is generally considered to be a state of nescience, and often the karana sarira is described as darkness, as the darkness of ignorance, Bhagavan says actually sleep is not a state of nescience, it's a state of pure awareness. Because it's a state in which, and also he says, but also what he implies, he doesn't actually say this, but he says, for example, in verse 26 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, Ahande undayan anatum undahum, ahande indrail indranatum. That means if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. He implies the same in so many other places, like in the 5th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, he says, of all the thoughts that appear in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first thought. Only after this rises do other thoughts arise. And other thoughts, Bhagavan says in the previous paragraph, that the world is nothing but thought. So other thoughts include the whole appearance of the world and the body. They're all nothing but thoughts. So it's only after the thought called I, that is ego, rises, that other thoughts rise. Only after the first person appears do second and third persons appear. Without the first person, that means without ego, second and third persons do not exist. So Bhagavan, since there's no ego in sleep, nothing else exists there. All these, the body and all the 5, consisting of 5 sheaths, comes into existence only in waking and dream when we rise as ego. So because Bhagavan isn't contradicting what is said in ancient texts, it's just in Advaita, there are different levels of explanation are provided to suit people of different levels of spiritual development. Not everyone is ready to accept the deeper teachings of Advaita as taught by Bhagavan. That is, for many people, it seems difficult to accept, but this whole world comes into existence only when I rise as ego. When I don't rise as ego, there's no body, no world, nothing. So in other words, in sleep, Bhagavan often said, in sleep, there is no world, there is no body. But that is difficult for most people to accept. So because not everyone is ready to accept the deeper teachings, in Advaita, different levels of explanation are given to suit people of different levels of spiritual maturity. But Bhagavan, what Bhagavan has taught us in texts like Nāṉ Ār and Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, this is the very deepest level of explanation Bhagavan has given us. So from Bhagavan's point of view, to say that the causal body remains in sleep is inapplicable, because how can a causal body exist in the absence of ego? Ego obviously is absent in sleep. There's no I am this body awareness in sleep. So ego is absent in sleep. Since ego is absent, everything is absent, including the causal body. Why it is said that the causal body remains in sleep is because people want an explanation. Why does the mind arise again from sleep? Since the mind dissolves in sleep, how does it rise again? So an easy explanation is to say, though the mind dissolves in sleep, the vasanas still remain in seed form, and those vasanas cause us to rise. And those vasanas collectively are what are called the causal body, or Anandamaya kosha. That is an easy explanation, but according to Bhagavan, that is not an appropriate explanation, because that implies that ego rises because of vasanas. But whose vasanas are they? They are only ego's vasanas. Without ego, there cannot be any vasanas. It is only ego that has, vasanas means inclinations. It's only ego that has these inclinations. Vishaya vasanas means the inclination for the attention to go outwards towards Vishaya, towards phenomena. But how can those vasanas remain, even in a seed form, in the absence of ego, since they're ego's vasanas? So that traditional explanation of the three bodies and the three, equating each of the three bodies to one of the three states, is not really applicable in Bhagavan's teachings. Another thing that is regarding the Anandamaya kosha, it is often said that the Anandamaya kosha consists of vasanas. It is also often said that the chittam, where sometimes the mind is classified into four antakaranas, inner organs. That is manas, buddhi, chittam, and ahankaram. If we equate these with the five sheaths, we can say the manas is the manamaya kosha. The buddhi is the vijnanamaya kosha. That everyone agrees with. The connection most people fail to make is that the chittam is the anandamaya kosha. The ego is not any of the koshas. It's that which identifies all the five koshas as I. So the chittam means the will. That is, the term chittam is sometimes used in a more general sense to mean mind generally, but specifically chittam means the will. And the chittam is also often said to be the abode of all the vasanas. That is, the collection of all the vasanas is chittam. But though chittam is often equated with vasanas, and Anandamaya kosha is often equated with vasanas, very few people seem to make the connection, but what is called chittam is otherwise what is called Anandamaya kosha. The reason this connection isn't made, because people think in terms of Anandamaya kosha being what remains in sleep. And so that part of the Karana Sarira, that's something different. So that the connections often aren't made. But if we think of it in terms of Bhagavan's teachings, then it is very clear that what is in some contexts referred to as chittam is what in other contexts is referred to as the Anandamaya kosha or Karana Sarira. Karana Sarira means causal body. The sense in which it's the causal body is that all our oh, sorry, I just will say one more thing before I come to that. Explain. The vasanas are the seed form of our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments. So they are the will in its seed form. So all the vasanas together collectively make what in English we would call the will, and what in Sanskrit is generally called chittam. So that is also what is referred to as the karana sarira. Because these seeds, which are called vasanas, are what give rise to everything else. They give rise to they're the seed form of likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, hopes, fears, and so on. And they further sprout as all thoughts, all perceptions, all memories, all everything. It sprouts from this. From the vasanas. Bhagavan said, the whole world is nothing but a projection of our vasanas. So in that sense, they're the cause for the appearance of all other things. However, they are not the cause for the appearance of ego, because ego, it is ego's vasanas. Ego is the one who has the vasanas. So the ultimate cause of all things, that is the vasanas are the cause of all phenomena, or the appearance of everything other than ourselves. But the cause of the vasanas is ego. Bhagavan has very, very clearly implied that the first cause, the cause of all other causes, is ego. That's why, as I say, he says in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. And as he says in this fifth paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, only after the first person appears do second and third persons appear. Without the first person, second and third persons do not exist. Bhagavan is very unequivocal in giving this teaching, and he implies it in so many other places in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and elsewhere. So the first cause, the cause of all other causes, is ego. Ego appears only in waking and dream. So in sleep, there is no ego and therefore nothing else. From the perspective of the ego in waking and dream, sleep seems to be a state of darkness in the sense of we're not aware of anything in sleep. But though we are not aware of anything in sleep, we are still aware. That is, the fundamental awareness I am exists throughout all the three states. So that fundamental awareness, that is the awareness of our own existence, that is the basic awareness, which is what we actually are. That is what Bhagavan often referred to as the screen on which all the pictures of this whole world appearance, their mind and world, all appear only on this screen. The screen is the fundamental awareness I am. That is what alone is real. So to put it in simple terms, the five sheaths are what is called the Annamaya kosha is the physical body, the physical form. What is called the Pranamaya kosha is the life. What is called the Manomaya kosha is the grosser functions of the mind. What is called that all functions of the mind other than the will and the intellect. What is called the Vijnanamaya kosha is the intellect or buddhi. What is called the Anandamaya kosha is the will. Why is it called Anandamaya kosha? As Bhagavan said in the first paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, Priyataku Sukhame Karanvadalalum, since happiness alone is the cause for love. That is, all desires, whatever we desire it because we think it's going to make us happy. So it is that the urge, that is that desire for happiness is the basic desire which drives the will. So all other likes, dislikes, hopes, fears, and attachments, all these things, they're all rooted in the basic desire for happiness. So because the will is nothing but that desire for happiness, it is referred to as the Anandamaya Kosha, the sheath of happiness, or we can call it the happiness. I mean, though it literally means the sheath composed of happiness, it's sheath composed of that desire for happiness. We can interpret it in that way. Whenever we rise as ego, we experience ourselves as a body, but we don't experience ourselves as a dead body. It's always a living body. So we've got the Annamaya Kosha and Pranamaya Kosha. And it's not a sleeping body. It's a body which is mentally alert. So there's the Manamaya Kosha function there, the Jnanamaya Kosha, and the Anandamaya Kosha. All the 5 sheaths are one bundle. We never experience one without experiencing all 5. That's why in the 5th verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says all 5. That is Aindum Adalal Aindum Udul Ennum Solil Adongum. That means all 5 are included in the term body. Does that explanation, is that a useful explanation, or do you want to ask anything more on that, Shalini?
No, it was extremely useful, Michael, and it was extremely useful both personally, experientially, but also for actually a lot of things I've been trying to work out. I just had this is something I want to clarify because it's so basic. When we think about the ego as the I thought, and then on the basis of this, we've got this desire for happiness, this kind of willing, which comes sort of grabbing, and and from that grabbing, if we like, that clinging as the Buddhists or whatever you want to call it, everything else happens. So the I thought, sort of not the I awareness, not the I am awareness, but the I thought which comes, is it a kind of a grasping, is that what it is? And I'm just wondering, and this is something which actually I've been trying to figure out, because for teaching and for, because whether it's Hinduism or Buddhism or whatever these names are, people are really trying to come to grips with this really basic thing which we're all prone to. So the I thought, is it this kind of grasping, this, always trying to grab, this piece of happiness through our perceptions, our thoughts, our, every single thing. Forms.
Absolutely. What Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is very applicable here. There he uses the word ahande. Ahande means ego, but ego and I thought, they're just 2 terms referring to the same thing. There he says, that is, in the last line of a verse, he describes ego as uruvatra ahande. That means formless phantom ego. Why he calls it formless, because ego has no form of its own. And he calls it a phantom because it has no substance of its own. Ego, as he explained in the previous verse, in verse 24, is chit jadagranti. It is neither chit, which is the pure awareness, it's neither sat-chit, the pure awareness, nor is it the body, which is jada. But it is the entanglement, it is the knot that is formed by the entanglement of these 2. So ego is neither the pure awareness, nor is it the body, but it's a confused mixture of the 2. So Bhagavan says, though it itself is formless, he begins the verse by saying, Urupatri Undam. That means grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri Nikkam, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri Undu Mika Ongam, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu Urupatram, that is, leaving one form, it grasps another form. So ego is always grasping. Grasping is the very nature of ego. Without grasping form, ego cannot stand. And then he says, Tedinal otum pidicum, if sought, it takes flight. That is, the ego is always trying to grasp things other than itself. But if we as ego try to grasp ourselves, because we are formless, ego dissolves and disappears. So this is this is a very, as far as I'm aware, in no other text has it been so clearly revealed what is the nature of ego, as Bhagavan explains in this verse. That is the nature of ego. It cannot exist without grasping things other than itself. Because if it's formless, all forms are things other than itself. Those forms don't exist independent of it. It's not as if the forms are there and the ego comes into existence grasping them. As ego comes into existence, it projects and grasps them. Because as he says in the next verse, verse 26, ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. So all these forms, they don't exist independent of ego. So what he means by grasping is we project and we grasp. How does ego grasp? Ego is a formless phantom. It's only by attending to or being aware of these things that we are grasping them. So we're grasping them in our perception, so to speak. So grasping is the very nature of ego. And what is the driving force behind grasping? The driving force behind all our activities is the search for happiness. Because our real nature is infinite happiness, we can never be satisfied with anything less than infinite happiness. So when we rise as ego, we limit ourselves to the form of this body. As a limited form, we cannot experience unlimited happiness. So as ego, we are always dissatisfied. We're always trying to, we've already grasped this body. Now we're trying to grasp other things. We're trying to grasp possessions. We're trying to grasp relationships. We're trying to grasp status in society. We're trying to grasp so many things. Our whole life, all thoughts are just grasping things, grasping. So grasping is the very nature of ego. But as long as we grasp anything other than ourselves, any form, we are nourishing and sustaining ego. When we try to grasp ourselves, because we are formless, ego subsides and disappears. So this is the important clue Bhagavan has given us about the nature of ego. So long as we attend to anything other than ourselves, we are feeding, nourishing ego. When we attend to ourselves, we are depriving ego of its nourishment and we are bringing about its dissolution. But it can't stand without grasping form.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that was really, actually, that was just, it sort of kind of deconstructs everything. Just a quick thing here in terms of the ego and the I thought and the grasping. You know, this thing that you know, the world comes into existence, and actually it's just this phantom which, you know, ends up having this sense of reality. I mean, it's actually a phantom, but it's an illusion in a sense, whatever, dreamlike, but it seems real. So, and this is something which somebody said, and it's stuck in my mind. You know, we have, and it comes up again and again, whether again Hinduism, Buddhism, this one, that one, it's all, you know, the same thing at one level, which is, you know, the sense of reality, the sense of solidity we have about the world is really substantial, right? And I mean, and you know, how can this not be real? And you know, this really has a grip on us, and it's what we've gripped is the sense of solidity, and it's what grips us in turn. And so this thing of grasping the I thought or the ego as grasping this ahankara, whatever you want to call it, or hambhava, whatever you want to call it, this grasping, it's a kind of a grasping for something solid, you know, trying to make oneself solid in some way, right? Some kind of like substance, you know, this is going to ground me, and that's what it is. And so this idea that we're looking for infinite happiness. So the infinite happiness itself is this kind of infinite sense of solidity and ground.
Yes.
Isn't it? And hence we're trying to do it in all these little ways.
Yes.
So it's a projection, you know, if this makes sense. So like this main reality we're trying to grab in all these limited ways is something solid.
Yeah, but what is really solid, we take this world to be solid. But what is actually solid is only I. That is the one thing. This world dissolves so easily. When you try working for 24 hours and you'll feel the world dissolving around you. You'll be so tired, you can't keep your eyes open. So this world is not as solid as it seems to be. What gives it that sense of solidity is our identification with this body. That is, why does the world always seem to be real? And when we are dreaming, as Bhagavan said, when we are dreaming, everything that happens in dreams seems to be just as real as everything that's happening now. So what is it that makes our current state always seem to be real? Because any dream we're in, whether this dream which we now take to be waking or any other dream, is in that dream, we always are a part of that dream. That is, we always experience ourselves as a body within that dream. What is actually real, what is actually solid, is only I. Because we take this body to be real, because we take this body to be I, the body seems to be real. Because what is actually real is only I. And since the body is a part of the world, the whole world seems to be real. So long as we are dreaming, the dream body and the dream world seem solid and real. As soon as we wake up from that dream, our identification with that dream body is broken, and we at once recognize, oh, it wasn't real, it was just a mental projection. Even an uneducated person knows that a dream isn't real, it's just a mental projection. But so long as we are experiencing it, it seems perfectly real. But that, I mean, now I'm talking about reality, but we can say the same about solidity. What is actually solid, what is actually enduring, is only that fundamental awareness I am. That's why Bhagavan somewhere Gana Vishwarupa, oh no, not there. Somewhere he refers to the I being Ganam. Ganam or something, I can't remember where, somewhere in Stuti Panchakam or somewhere. That is, what is actually really solid is only that fundamental awareness I am. But because our attention is always going outwards, the world seems to be solid, and we say, oh, I'm not able to catch that I. The I seems very elusive. I am not able to catch I. Which is obviously absurd, because who is one trying? It is the I which is saying I cannot be captured. So it's absurd. But we get ourselves in such a muddle because of our identification of ourselves with the body.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Michael. That was really very, very, I don't know, indescribably helpful.
Okay, good. I see there are lots of hands raised. Before I answer those questions, I mean, I'm glad there are lots of questions, because I've only got one more email question to answer, and then we can. It's
can I ask a question regarding the same?
No. Oh, is it particularly relevant?
It's part of this.
Okay, right. Yes, certainly.
Already posted the question on the chat, if you can read it along with me. See, you said ego is a wrong identification of I am the body, or the 5 koshas, right?
Yes.
But ego itself is part of the manomaya kosha.
No.
Because manomaya kosha is manas, buddhi, chittam, and ahankar. So is ego the ahankar?
No. Manomaya kosha, in the analysis of the mind into these 4 antakaranas, the manomaya kosha corresponds only to manas. That means, in that context, manas means the gross functions of the mind. The thinking, the perception, the memories, the feelings, all the gross functions. In other words, all the functions of the mind, other than the intellect and the will. The Jnanamaya kosha is the buddhi, the intellect. That is the judging, discriminating, distinguishing function of the mind. The chittam is the Anandamaya kosha, the will, the collection of all the vasanas. The ego is not any of the 5 sheaths. Ego is that which identifies all the 5 sheaths as I. We need to be very careful with the problem is this terms don't have a fixed meaning. In different contexts, the same term can have different meanings. Sometimes the term mind is used as a collective term for all these 4, manas, buddhi, chittam, and ahankara. And as Bhagavan said in verse 18 of Upadēśa Undiyār, in enengale manam. The mind is only enengale manam. Thoughts alone are the mind. Yavinum nanenum enum me mulamam. Of all, I mean, of all thoughts, the thought called I alone is the root. Yanam manam enal. What is called mind is only I. What this means is the term mind is, in some contexts, it's used as a collective term to refer to all the thoughts. However, of all the thoughts, the root is I. Other thoughts come and go, but the one, so long as there is mind, the thought I remains. That is, no other thought can stand without the thought called I. But the thought called I can stand, it always needs some other thought, but it doesn't need any particular other thought. So it can stand, one minute it's clinging to one thought, next moment it's clinging to some other thought, but it's not dependent on any one particular thought or any one particular form. So what the mind essentially is only the ego, that is the thought called I. So in other places, for example, in verse 24 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, as I said, I'll read verse 24 because it's a very important verse to understand the nature of ego, since that's the subject we're talking about. What he says in verse 24 is, Jada Uḍal Nāṇ, the insentient body does not say I. When he says does not say I, he's using the term say here in a metaphorical sense. What he means when he said the insentient body, the Jada Uḍal, does not say I, but the body itself is not aware of itself as I, because it's Jada. It has no awareness. Satchit Uḷḷadu, that is the satchit, that is the fundamental awareness, the real awareness, the awareness of our own existence, satchit Uḷḷadu, does not rise. So the body doesn't say I, the satchit doesn't rise. Alava Nāṉ Ār udikum ideo. That means in between, implying in between the body and satchit, to the extent of the body, one thing called I rises. When he says here, in between, obviously he's not, we shouldn't take this term in between literally, but if we take it literally, that means on one side we've got a Jada body, and on the other side we've got satchit, as if these two things exist independently. Obviously, nothing exists independent of satchit, so satchit alone is the reality. He's using the term here, in between, ideal, in a metaphorical sense. I think the best way of explaining the sense in which he uses the term in between here is, supposing you read some story in the newspaper and you ask me if it's true. I may say it's neither true nor false, but somewhere in between. What does that mean? It has elements of truth and it has elements of falsehood. So it's neither wholly true nor is it wholly false. It's a mixture of the two. So in that sense, he uses the term in between here. So this ego that rises between the body and satchit, it is neither the body nor is it satchit, but it takes on certain qualities of both. Like the body, it seems to be limited in time and space. But like satchit, it seems to be aware. So it's neither the body nor is it satchit, but a confused mixture of the two. And then he says, know that this is chit jadagranti. Chit jadagranti means they're not formed by the entanglement of chit and jada, of satchit and the awareness. When they're mixed together, when they're confused together, of course they're not, satchit itself is never confused. It's only the ego which confuses the two. So this is chit jadagranti. Bandham, that's bondage. Jivan, the soul. Nupame, the subtle body. Ahande, ego. Ichamsaram, this samsara, manam. So he's using the term manam, as he, in the same sense that he says in the last sentence of verse 18 of Upadēśa Undiyār, manam here refers to, is another term for ego. So often when Bhagavan uses the term mind, he's using the term mind, he's using that term to refer to ego. That is, if we analyze the mind consists of subject and object. That is a perceiver and things perceived. All other thoughts are things perceived. Ego is the thought that perceives all the other thoughts. So ego is the subject, all other thoughts are objects. Ego is the perceiver, all other thoughts are things perceived by it. So, so what is essential in the mind is the perceiver. What is perceived is constantly changing, but the perceiver remains constant. So we have to understand from the context in what sense each term is used. So in the context of the 5 sheaths, the Manomaya kosha is not referring to ego. It's referring only to the grosser functions of the mind. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yes, it's answered my question.
Okay. So shall I just answer one more question from email and then we'll have our break, if that's okay? This email, it's from a friend who asked to remain anonymous. It's a little bit long what he's written, but I'll read it just to give the context. What he says is, I'm looking for help on an incident that has been troubling my family, mum, I, and sisters, for the past 2 weeks. We had to vacate our house where we have been staying for 35 years, since it is leaking water during rain and due to its poor condition. When looking for another house to shift to, I found 2 places, one of which is very spacious and costly, while the other is average. I did not know which one to choose, and whenever I'm put in this condition and don't know what to choose, I just create 2 chits with these options and then ask Aruṇācala Bhagavan to make a decision for me. The reason I make a decision with chits is I don't know what to choose, and we may let things unfold as they would, but when you have family waiting for you to make a decision, I just left it to Bhagavan to help me make the decision. In this case, I picked a chit which had second house, which was small. But since I did not like that house, I tried again with the chits, and I was again asked to go for the second house. But I, being foolish, did not heed this decision of Aruṇācala and went ahead with the house which was costly and spacious, which is not the chit I had picked. After exactly 3 days of moving into the first house, my mum claimed that she had seen some ghostly activity in the house. I'm sure you're aware of the seriousness with which Indians see these issues. The ghostly activity was like some young lady muttering something. My mother and family have become extremely worried about the situation, as they were hearing some strange sounds at 3 a.m. in the morning. I did not know what to do, since I did not hear or see such activity. I have asked Bhagavan to help me hear these sounds, and in 2 hours, I heard these sounds myself. I did not know what to do at this point in time. And then he asks his question. Question, was Bhagavan giving me a warning not to shift to the second house? Or was it already destined according to my prarabdha, but I would move into the first house and go through this experience? Or if I had listened to Aruṇācala when the chit showed the second house and moved into the second house, would my subsequent happening in my life be different? Then he goes on to ask more questions that I'll first answer up to here. Nothing can happen in our life which is not according to prarabdha. You moved into the house into which you moved because that is your prarabdha and the prarabdha of all your family. We may make many foolish decisions in our life, but whatever foolish decisions we make or whatever wise decisions we make, it cannot change what is destined to happen. In the note that Bhagavan wrote for his mother, he said, Avarava prarabdha prakaram adhikanavan angangirindu artavipan. That is, according to the prarabdha of each person, he who is for that means God or Guru, being there, meaning in the heart of each one of them, Atma-vichara will make them act. So we are made to act according to our prarabdha. That doesn't mean, some people wrongly understand this, they take this to mean that all our activities are according to prarabdha. That is clearly not what Bhagavan meant, because what is prarabdha? The prarabdha is the fruit of actions we've done in the past. What are the actions that bear fruit? The actions that bear fruit are what are called agamya. Agamya means actions that we do by our will. So not all our actions are driven by prarabdha, but in order for us to experience whatever our prarabdha may be, there are certain actions that we need to do. We will be made to do those actions. So since it was your prarabdha to be moving to that house where there's supposedly some ghostly activity, it was your prarabdha to move to that house. So even though the chits advised you something different, your intellect was driven by Bhagavan to choose that house. So you moved there according to your prarabdha. Then Bhagavan says in continuation, that note he wrote to his mother, Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. That means what is never to happen will not happen, however much effort we make. Nāṛpadu Uڵḷadu. Whatever is to happen will not stop, however much obstacle we make. So we're free to try to achieve things that are not destined to happen, but they won't happen, however much we try to make them happen. We're also free to try to stop what is destined to happen, but however much we try to stop it, it's not going to stop. It's going to happen. And then he says, Iduvei tinnam, this is certain. So we can be absolutely sure, Bhagavan is very, very emphatic here. Only what is destined to happen is going to happen. Ahalin monamai irake nandru. Therefore, being silent is good. So what does he mean by being silent in this context? It obviously doesn't mean that we shouldn't do any activities, because the activities that our mind and body are destined to do, we cannot avoid doing. So we will be made by God to do those actions that are necessary for us to experience prarabdha. But what the actions that we should avoid are those actions that are driven by our will. In other words, our agamya. If we refrain from doing agamya, that is keeping silent. But how can we refrain from doing agamya? What is it that causes us to do agamya? It's our will, our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. So long as we rise as ego, we have to a greater or lesser extent got likes, dislikes, desires, attachments. We may be able to reduce the strength of our desires, attachments, and likes and dislikes, and so on, but they will remain so long as we remain as ego. So in order to avoid doing agamya, we need to avoid rising as ego. So what Bhagavan means by monamai irake is just being as we actually are, not rising as ego, which we can do only by clinging firmly to self-attentiveness. So regarding your questions, you say, was Bhagavan giving me a warning not to shift to the second house? We can't say. It was your destiny to move to that house, so you moved to that house. You say that you use chits. I know many people in India who do this. It's believed to be an easy way of letting God make the decision for you. But that is useful only, if you don't obey what the chits say first time, then you may as well not use chits. You say, first time you disobeyed, second time you disobeyed, then what's the point of using those chits? If the first time you have followed it, that would be meaningful, but you couldn't follow it because it was your destiny to move to this house. So relying on chits is, if we've understood Bhagavan's teachings, we will not rely on chits, because even suppose this is a very good example. It was your destiny to move to the first house, but chit said move to the second house. But since it was your destiny to move to a first house, you couldn't avoid moving to a first house. You were made by Bhagavan to do that. Then what is the point of the chits? if we want to rely on Bhagavan's guidance, we shouldn't rely on any external things like chips. We should try to curb the rising of our ego. By trying to curb the rising of our ego, we are not interfering in what is happening, and what is happening is going to happen. Even if we don't curb the rising of ego, what is going to happen anyway. But the more we curb the rising of ego, the less we are interfering in what is destined to happen anyway. So the less we suffer as a consequence. So the wisest course is to avoid rising his ego, to keep ego always in check. So then you go on to say, to ask another question. Lastly, we say God is love. Then why are we put in these situations when God is all powerful and all merciful? Yes, I think in all theistic religions, Hinduism and also Judaism, Islam and Christianity, all these religions, any religion that has a concept of God, generally the concept of an all-powerful God, generally says God is all-powerful, omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing, omniscient, and benevolent, all-loving. So but that's why many people say, then there can't really be a God, because if there was a God, there shouldn't be any suffering in this world. If God is really all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving, then how can any wrong things happen in this world? We pass that judgment from our perspective. We see all these, we see wars, we see famines, we see people suffering, diseases, we see so many sufferings in this world, and we think, how can God allow all these things if he's all love? If as we believe, God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-love, that means whatever happens is happening with his knowledge, because he's all-knowing. It's happening with his permission, because he's all-powerful. And because he's all love, it means it's happening for a good purpose. So all the things that we see as bad, all the wars and the famines and the terrible sufferings that people undergo in this world, not only people, all sentient creatures are undergoing, but what is the law of the jungle? There are predators and there are prey, and all, and that any sentient being is identifying a body as I, and that body will needs food, and it needs so many things, and if it doesn't get food, it feels hungry, and it catches diseases, and it grows old, and eventually, if it doesn't die a violent death early, it will eventually die of old age. So this is the nature of embodied existence. There's no such thing as a perfect embodied state. So long as we identify ourselves as a body, we are courting disease, old age, death, violence, starvation. All these are possibilities, and death is the one thing that is certain, so long as we take ourselves as a body. So what is God's aim? God is nothing but our own real nature. And as our own self, God loves us as himself. He doesn't love us as something other than himself. He loves us as himself. So he wants us to be happy.
Dewey wants to be with you.
Sorry? I'm sorry, there was some interruption. So God wants us to be happy, but to be truly happy. Truly happy means our real nature is infinite happiness. Anything less than infinite happiness cannot satisfy us. So God's sole aim is to lead us back to our original state of infinite happiness. So whatever may happen in our life, in the course of our life, we may suffer in so many ways. All this suffering is all for a purpose. The ultimate purpose of God is only to bestow upon us supreme happiness, infinite happiness, which is our real nature. He's not actually giving it to us. He's just restoring us to our own real state. Any happiness we experience in this world is finite. Any misery we experience in this world is finite. It's all finite. So none of these things are going to satisfy us. So whatever may happen in our life, or in the life of any creature, any sentient being, is happening for our own, for the good of each one of us. Because God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-love, nothing can happen that is against his will, that is not allowed by him, and that is not good for us. That we need to, if we have such faith, then only will we be really ready to let go of everything and surrender entirely to him. And if we're not ready to surrender to him, I mean, the whole of Bhagavan's teaching is all about surrender. Okay, Bhagavan sometimes said, either investigate yourself or surrender yourself. But though Bhagavan said it as if there were two alternatives, actually they're one and the same. We cannot investigate ourselves without surrendering ourselves. As he says in verse 26 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what it is giving up everything. Why is it giving up everything? Because when we investigate ego, we are thereby, ego cannot stand, ego seems to exist only so long as we look at other things, so long as we grasp other things. When we turn within to grasp ourselves, ego thereby dissolves. So by investigating ourselves, we are giving up ego, and thereby we are giving up everything. So we need to be willing to give up everything. Until then, we struggle, we cling to things, and we suffer as a consequence of our clinging. So the cause of our suffering is not God, it's ourselves. Because we rise as ego and cling to things, we caught suffering. There's a beautiful verse in Tirukkural, Bhagavan often used to quote, Yadlin, Yadlin, Ningina Nodal, Adlin, Adlin, Illan. I mean, from whatever thing you separate yourself, or whatever thing you give up, you're free from the suffering caused by that thing. That means all things cause us suffering. It's only by giving up everything that we can be free of suffering and be restored to our natural state of infinite happiness. And then you go on to say, I've nearly finished this now, I'm not questioning Bhagavan Aruṇācala. I don't have the least stature to do that. I'm just trying to understand why these things happen the way they do. Well, I hope I've explained it. Whatever happens, we may not understand it, but whatever is happening for good. We need to have that faith. When we have that faith, but whatever is happening only for our good, then only will we be ready to let go of everything, leave the whole burden to Bhagavan. And Bhagavan says in the 13th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, however much burden we leave on God, he will bear all of it. So instead, when we know he's driving all the karyas, when everything that is meant to happen is being made to happen by him, when he's that one Paramash Shakti that is driving all karyas, instead of yielding ourselves to it, why should we always be thinking, I should do like this, I should do like this? Okay, I don't know whether I should do like this or that. Let me put chips. I'll put one chip for this and one chip for that. We shouldn't even be thinking whether we do this or that. We should leave even that burden of thinking what decision we should make, leave it to Bhagavan. He will make us make the right decision, because we cannot avoid making the decision, whatever is, we cannot avoid what is destined to happen. If we had to make a decision to bring about what is destined to happen, we'll be made to make that decision. Even if the chips we put tell us otherwise, we will seemingly go against his will, and but actually whatever happens, it's all his will. And then finally you ask, and lastly, what do you suggest I should do in this situation? What you should do in this situation is what we should do in every situation, which is leave the whole burden to Bhagavan. As he said in that beautiful analogy, we are passengers traveling on a train. That is, our life is like a train. The train is Bhagavan. Rather than carrying our suffering by carrying our own luggage on our head, we should travel happily by putting the luggage aside. In other words, we should leave the whole burden to Bhagavan. So what you should do in this situation or in any other situation, leave it to Bhagavan. If you leave it to Bhagavan, he will make you do whatever, your body, speech, and mind, do whatever is necessary for them to do. And whatever is going to happen anyway. Whether you cannot avoid in any way what is destined to happen. And then you say, just turn my mind towards Bhagavan Aruṇācala as much as possible and let things unfold as they would. Exactly. You've answered your own question. That's all we need to do. We need to cling firmly to Bhagavan. And Bhagavan is that which is always shining in our heart as eye. So the more we cling to that eye, the more we are allowing him to run our life without our interference. He's running our life anyway. He's directing our life as it is, whether we interfere or not. But by avoiding interfering, we are saving ourselves from the suffering caused by our interference. So let us the whole of Bhagavan's teachings is subside, subside, subside. And we can subside only by clinging firmly to him in the heart. And he's always shining in our heart as eye. So that alone is what is real. That alone is what we should cling to. That alone is the solution to all our problems. So I hope that answers this friend's question adequately. Before I start answering the questions of people who've got their hands raised, there were various questions asked in the comments. I don't know if I'll be able to reply to all of them, but one very simple one. Katie asked, what of these chits? Are they like dice? What chit mean? This is referring to the previous question where a friend had said that he had written chits to help him make the decision which house to choose. In this context, chit means chits of paper. Now, a small piece of paper. This is something I don't know about in other countries, but it's a thing many people in India do. If they have to make a decision whether to choose house A or house B, they write on the chit, house A or house B. They put it before a picture of Bhagavan or God, whatever is their God, and then they don't know which. They mix them. I mean, they move them around, so they don't know which is which, and then they choose one of them, and whichever one it is, they should follow that. So if it says house A, you have to choose house A. That's what. So chit there means a chit of paper. In other words, a small piece of paper. So it's a bit like dice, but you're just leaving. It's an idea that many people have. That's a way of leaving the decision up to God. It's at a certain level of spiritual development that's maybe appropriate, but when we go deeper into Bhagavan's path, it's not really appropriate, because whatever we know from Bhagavan, from what Bhagavan has taught us, that whatever is destined to happen is going to happen. And we shouldn't be thinking whether we need to decide we need to do this or do that, whether we need to decide this or that. We should leave the whole burden to Bhagavan. That's what we should aim to do. We may not be able to do that, but that's what we should be trying to do. We should leave all concern about worldly matters entirely to Bhagavan, knowing that he's already predetermined whatever is going to happen. And he's predetermined it for our own good. So we should be happy to accept whatever happens according to his will. So I'll now answer questions in the order. I think the order in which they're showing here is the order in which people raise their hand. Shalini, I know your hand is raised. I will, if you need to, before you leave, I'll try to answer your question. So if you
don't worry about it, Mike. Don't worry about it.
The time. Ashwin, you were the first person who had your hand raised.
Hi, Michael. Thank you very much for doing this again. I'd just like to ask, I know you talked about the 3 states, but when Bhagavan was going through his sarcoma operation and had to go under general anesthesia, what would his experience have been then? Would it be the same? Because obviously, I just wanted to know about that.
Okay. When we ask any questions about Bhagavan's state, we need to distinguish between what Bhagavan actually is and what he appears to be in our view.
Yeah.
When Bhagavan, when the boy Venkataraman underwent that death experience in Madurai, the ego that was aware of itself as I am Venkataraman was annihilated. What then remained was just pure awareness. So for Bhagavan, Bhagavan is nothing but that pure awareness, what is otherwise called Brahman. That's why it's said in a lot of scriptures, the knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. Actually, it's not a matter of becoming. When we know what we actually are, we remain as we actually are. What we actually are is pure awareness, which is what is called Brahman. As pure awareness, we are not aware of anything other than ourselves. And pure awareness is immutable, so we never undergo any change whatsoever. That is what Bhagavan actually is. So Bhagavan is that which is shining in our heart as I, and which is ever unaffected by any of this appearance. He is like the screen on which all this picture of this dream appears, this picture of this cinema picture of this world appears. So Bhagavan was not actually aware of anything. He was aware of, well, he wasn't aware of anything other than himself. However, in our view, we see Bhagavan as a person. That is, as Bhagavan often said, because you see yourself as a body, you see me as a body. I don't see myself as this body. So because we mistake ourselves as a body, that means the body consisting of these 5 sheaths, we see Bhagavan as the same. And in our view, Bhagavan seems to, he answers questions, he participates in cutting vegetables in the kitchen, he goes for a walk, he writes verses, he does so many activities, but this is all only in our view. In his view, he just is as he is. No, there's no change. So you're now referring to the Bhagavan as the person that he seems to be. About the anesthesia, there's a little bit of confusion about this. Some people, in some books it said that Bhagavan didn't take any anesthesia at all when he underwent the operation. In some books it is said, I believe it wasn't actually general anesthesia, I think it was a regional anesthesia he was given for the last and the biggest of the operations. But whatever it is, even if Bhagavan had been in a coma, it's only in our view that he's in that coma. For him, there is no difference in any of these states. He's always aware just of I am, nothing other than I am. Bhagavan will, whatever be the state of, that is, the state of general anesthesia, it's a state of manolaya. Like it's a sleep-like state. But for Bhagavan, there's no manolaya because there's no mind to be in there. In our view, it may appear, oh, Bhagavan is sleeping or Bhagavan is in anesthesia. But it's only in our view, not in his view. In his view, there is only one state, and that is the state of pure awareness, which is what he actually is. So does that adequately answer your question?
No, it does. Thank you. I think that probably also answers the follow-on was, did Bhagavan sleep or anything like that? But I think that adequately answers that question as well.
Bhagavan
so
says,
thank you.
In verse 31 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, talking about the state of the jnani, he says the jnani does not know anything other than himself. How can we, who can understand his state as it is such? So we cannot understand his state until we are in that state ourselves. That is, he is what we actually are. So when we know ourselves as we actually are, we will know him. Until then, we don't know him as he actually is. We know him as he appears in our view, as a kind and loving old man who bestows so much kindness and love on everyone. But he is not that. He is the infinite love that was shining through that old man with a walking stick.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Infinite clarity.
Thank you.
The next, Sanjay, you've got your hand raised. You're the next one, I think.
So, 1 minute, sir. 1 minute, sir. Yes, sir. So, in the latest mountain path, in the article, the paramount importance of self-attention, you have recorded Sadhu Om as saying, my voice is clear, sir?
Yes,
coming to you? Yes. So, in the latest mountain path, you have recorded Sadhu Om as saying, the amount of time that the mind is active and the amount of time that it can rest is determined by prarabdha.
Yes.
So no one can sit calmly in meditation or remain in manolaya any longer than is allotted in their prarabdha. So my question is, sir, how is the time we spend in manolaya determined by our prarabdha? Since there is no ego in manolaya, how can a prarabdha be operational in such a state?
There is
As
also,
we understand. Yes, sir.
there is also no time in manolaya. But time, when we wake up from sleep, we look at our clock and we say, oh, I was asleep for 8 hours. But we weren't aware of the passing of time while we're asleep. So this is all from the perspective, the duration of manolaya or duration of sleep is only from the perspective of ego in waking and dream. Because time comes into existence only when ego comes into existence. In manolaya, as you say, there is no time. So it's all from the perspective of ego. The prarabdha is for ego during the waking and dream states.
Yes.
When prarabdha is to come to an end is determined by prarabdha, and when a new batch of prarabdha is to begin is also determined. So yeah, it's in that sense that he says it's all determined by prarabdha.
Yes, because it is said prarabdha is only for the outward turned mind. There's no prarabdha for the inward turned mind. So I was thinking when one is in manolaya, we should be out of the purview of the prarabdha. That was what my question was.
Yeah, in manolaya, there's no mind at all. So
there's no mind. So there is no destiny also.
No, there's no destiny. But from the perspective of waking or dream, manolaya or sleep is a gap between one period of waking or dream and the next period of waking or dream. So there seems to be a gap, and then from the perspective of the mind in waking or dream, that gap seems to have a duration.
Okay. Okay. I've got one more question, sir. Should I ask now or later?
Ask now. Ask now.
One more question is there. Fine. Now, sir, I believe Nochur Venkatraman in one of his talks said that the last Upadēśa given by Bhagwan before he dropped his body was given to his assistant Shivanandam. I have not heard of this before. The first time I heard it, someone just now related it to me. The Upadēśa supposedly was, see who breathes in you. See who breathes in you. This was the Upadēśa. I have not heard. Yes. Have you heard about it, sir? Have you heard about
this particular Upadēśa? But that is the same Upadēśa Bhagwan was giving us for 54 years. It may be worded differently, but to see who is it in you, yes.
Yes, see who breathes in you, it said.
Okay,
see who breathes.
In a particular context. I don't know the context.
So I was just wondering whether it sounds like an authentic Upadēśa of Bhagwan. Do you remember reading about this Upadēśa? I believe by advising Shivanandam, see who breathes in you, Bhagwan is merely advocating the practice of self-attentiveness. So like, that's what I'm saying. So that is that looks like Bhagwan's Upadēśa only.
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
It seems authentic. The context of saying breathes in you may have been in some particular context Bhagavan said that. But
maybe
see who is the seer.
See who is the seer. Maybe Shivanandam was attracted to the practice of pranayama, maybe. So all that just to bring his attention from breathing to his eye.
Could be. We don't know. And unless we know more about the context, we can't say.
Yes.
But we know these were my two questions. We know what Bhagavan's teaching is. The whole of Bhagavan's teaching is all focused on this one thing. See yourself. See the seer.
Yeah, but because this was a beautiful way of putting it. See who breathes in you. Yes. So though it's that teaching, but first time I've heard it, but it's a beautiful way of putting it.
Yes.
See who breathes in you.
Yeah.
It's a new way of putting
it.
Appropriate.
That's a very appropriate for anyone who is interested in pranayama. That's a very appropriate.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So like I also related.
Goes back to the root.
Yes. So I was also wondering whether you have heard about it, but because I have not heard about it. This is the first time I heard about it.
But there are so many stories we hear. We don't know what's true or not, but it seems a plausible story.
Yes, it is a plausible story.
Yes.
Thanks, sir. It's
Okay.
over. My points are over. Thank you, sir.
Okay, and then Jim, next person, Jim Cuthbert.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Just before I ask something, Michael, I just want to say a big thanks really for these discussions, because these beautiful teachings of Bhagavan are just so important for us. It almost makes you cry when you listen to them. They're fantastic. Yeah. But I wanted to go back to some of the discussions before, and it links a little bit with what Shalini was saying. It struck me, both through hearing what you've said over a number of meetings and also reflection, that my finite mind is looking for infinite happiness, which isn't possible, but it's also ironic, as I am infinite happiness. So it struck me that it's more, as you've been saying, about letting go and turning inwards, and that's all that's needed. Now, I get that on an intellectual level. It makes a lot of sense. I'm practicing that. And yet, if I'm very, very honest, there's usually a but that comes in, not infrequently. And this but, it seems to me, when I think about it deeply, it's because of two things. One is what you've spoke about before, which is the still tendency to go outwards and attach to other things. But it's also something else. It's, I think, a subtle fear of this, a thought about nescience or a blankness or a darkness, which you've spoke about before. Now, I trust Bhagavan's teachings implicitly, and it's very clear that it isn't a blank, it isn't a nescience. He talks about this. He talks about glory awaits those who follow self-enquiry, etc. And yet, the thinking or finite mind struggles with this because it's trying to analyze something. So my question is this, as you keep saying and drumming into us, a trusting thing of turning inwards, letting go? Don't worry so much about finding something tangible, because it isn't that. It's just letting go and it will happen itself. That's my question.
Yeah, yes, but we can let go of everything else only by clinging to ourselves. So the clinging is necessary, but the trouble is we now cling to the wrong things. We need to cling to nothing other than ourselves. About fear. So long as there is desire, there will be fear. If we desire to live, we will fear death. So a fear is just any fear we experience is an indication of an underlying desire. So when you say that you fear the blank or the nothingness, it is because we still have desire for all this multiplicity, all this everythingness. So that shows we are still attached to phenomena. What is called a blank is not a complete blank, because a blank cannot be experienced without an experiencer. So the fundamental awareness will always remain there. When everything else is removed, yes, it will be a blank. It will be a sunya, a void, in the sense that it'll be completely devoid of phenomena, completely devoid of awareness of phenomena. As Bhagavan says, the real awareness is the awareness that is devoid of awareness and ignorance of phenomena. He doesn't say phenomena, he implies of phenomena. So that's why he says it is not a void, it's a fullness of pure awareness and infinite happiness. But from the perspective of ego that takes all these phenomena to be real, I'm going to lose all these, I'm going to lose all my relatives, my friends, everything I hold dear. I'm afraid to lose all these things. I'm afraid just to be in a state of blank. Why? Because we still want all these things. So we should understand that whatever fear we experience is an indication of an underlying desire. That we cannot completely remove desire so long as we rise as ego. Desire, grasping is the very nature of ego. Desire is the very nature of ego. But we need to give up our desires to as much as possible, because only when our desires have been reduced in strength to a considerable extent will we eventually be willing to let go entirely, to surrender ourselves completely. So what the fear you experience, this is all natural. It's all part of the process. That is, letting go. We're undergoing a process whereby we are gaining the willingness to let go. So during this process, we will experience all sorts of desires and fears and so on. This is part of the process. But we have to, we shouldn't allow our mind to be swayed by any of the desires or fears that may arise. We should continue clinging firmly to I. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Michael. The only other thing is it's this infinite happiness itself. Yes, it's not contingent on any phenomenon, as you say, but it is it is reality. It's not.
That alone is real.
Yeah.
And that is you. That is what you actually are. It's not a happiness, something other than yourself that you're going to gain. It's what you actually are. Remove all the coverings, and what remains is happiness. The coverings means all this, the ego and all its phenomena and adjuncts and so on. Just remove this ego, what remains is happiness. We experience that every night in sleep. In sleep, we are perfectly happy, perfectly satisfied. We cannot now recall that state of sleep perfectly. We know we had no problems in sleep. We had no complaints, but actually sleep is a state of infinite happiness. Why? Because we as ego are absent. So we want to return and remain permanently in our own natural state of infinite happiness. All we need to do is to remove ego permanently. And to remove ego permanently, we just need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. But we need to be willing to let go of everything. That is the problem. We're not yet willing to let go. So because the only obstacle on this path is our own clinging.
Is infinite happiness more akin to sleep, as you allude to there, or wakeful sleep in a kind of, there's a subtle difference there?
The difference, what is called wakeful sleep is our real state. The difference between sleep and wakeful sleep is the state of manonasa. So we never come out of that state. Sleep is a state of manoleo, that it's only a temporary dissolution of mind. So we come out of it again. The only problem with sleep is that we come out of it. If we didn't come out of it, there'd be no problem. So because sleep is a state devoid of mind. All differences exist only in the mind. So there cannot be any difference between sleep and wakeful sleep. It's only, except in the view of a waking mind. The waking mind says, oh, I've come out of sleep, therefore sleep is defective.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
The next one is Bhawani. Sorry, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce our name. Is it Bhawani? You've got your hand raised.
Vanakkam, Michael. This is Bhavani. And I like to please forgive me if my question is egoistic or rude. And I have a drilling question for a long time. The mind has an image. When we think, the image comes with that. To do the self-inquiry, when I go into Nāṉ Ār self-inquiry, the image also come with that. Some kind of image every time is the mind. I believe the mind is associated with the image also. And then how do I, if I try to blank it, it's a black is there, but I suspect that also mind's image.
An image is a form. Any form is something other than ourselves. What we need to be attending to is not to any image or any form, but to that which is aware of all images and forms. Is it clear what I mean by that? Images and forms are things that appear and disappear. No image ever remains forever. So if it's something that appears and disappears, it cannot be what we actually are. So we need to be to that which is ever shining, ever existing. That is only the fundamental awareness of our own existence, I am. That alone is what is real. That is what we need to try to cling to.
Okay. Then going in, when we were told to going in, then the image comes like going into the body means there are image of organs and things are there.
But what Bhagavan means by in is when Bhagavan talks about turning within, he's using in a deeper sense than that. He's not, I mean, in some contexts, when we talk about within and without, by within we mean within the body, outside is the things that are outside the body. It's not in that sense that Bhagavan is talking. According to Bhagavan, all phenomena are outside. That is the body, the mind, the thoughts, everything is outside. It's all external to ourselves. What is inside, in this context, is only I. So all phenomena are outside. So attending to anything, any thought or any feeling or any image or any form is all bahirmukham. Antamukham or ahamukham, as Bhagavan often called it, means facing only towards I. In fact, in Sanskrit, they usually talk about antamukham or bahirmukham. But in Tamil, there's a very nice term which means the same as antamukham, but it emphasizes the real meaning of antamukham more clearly. That is ahamukham. Because in Tamil, the term aham has two meanings. One is, as everyone knows, it's the first person pronoun in Sanskrit, aham meaning I. In Tamil, there's also a native Tamil word, aham, which means inside or home or heart. So when Bhagavan talks about ahamukham, we can interpret it as facing within or facing towards I. It had both meanings. So, but both mean the same. In the sense in which Bhagavan talks about facing within, that is, ahamukham alone is real antamukham. Only with people think if you're watching your thoughts, you're facing inwards. No, you're not. You're still facing outwards because you're facing something other than yourself. So long as you're looking away from yourself at anything other than yourself, that's bahirmukham. So even the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the likes, the dislikes, everything is anya. It's all other than ourselves. So it's all bahir. It's all outside. What is inside is only ourself.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay. Shalini, do you want to ask your question now?
Yes, Michael. It was just to clarify something, which was you were talking about God, and it was just to ask what exactly we should mean by God. And you're mentioning, I mean, on the one hand, there is sort of the I or the self, which is this awareness, the sort of primordial awareness of I am. And then there is the Param Shakti, which seems to be what is meant by God, or Parashakti. So it was basically, if we're not going to have two things, then it would be that this awareness is also this sort of, it's not the kind of awareness we think of as awareness. It's an intense state of being, or whatever one wishes to call it, which is highly sort of energetic or active or alive in some way. And I just wanted to clarify that. I mean, what's meant by God in that sense?
Okay. The reality of God is nothing but our own swarupa, our own real nature, the pure awareness that we actually are. That is the reality of God. However, when we limit ourselves as a person, obviously this person isn't God. So God seems to be something other than ourselves. God is infinite. God is all knowing, all powerful, all loving. As this ego, we can't say I'm all knowing, all loving, all powerful. So God seems to be something other than ourselves. But so long as we can consider God to be something other than ourselves, that's what Bhagavan calls Anya Bhava. Our mind is still going away from ourselves. It may be having great love for God, and that love will prepare the mind and make the mind willing to surrender to God. But we cannot surrender to God fully so long as we see God as other than ourselves. It's only when we are willing to accept that God is not something outside ourselves or other than ourselves. God is our own reality, what we actually are. And to know God, we have to turn within. Only when we are willing to accept that, and only by meditating on I are we truly meditating on God, then only will we be able to surrender, will our surrender become complete. So this is the distinction that is made in Advaita between Saguna Brahman and Niguna Brahman. So long as the God who seems to be outside, that is Saguna Brahman. He's got all qualities, all knowing, all powerful, everything. But what he actually is Niguna. He's beyond all qualities because he alone exists.
Yes, I remember this thing in Bhagwan that basically sort of God exists as long as you think that this individual exists.
Yeah, that's there. He's talking about the Saguna Brahman, the God as something other than ourselves.
Yes, and once we think of it as ourselves, then of course there is nothing to be named.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you.
So it's all a matter of our perspective, whether we see God as something other than ourselves. There was actually, in that connection, I saw one of the questions here. Someone had asked a question, I think, about Aruṇācala. Yes, someone, Manek had asked, my second question is love for Aruṇācala Shiva. Is it a sort of Dvaita, as in dualistic form of worship? That all depends on how we see Aruṇācala. Bhagavan has said in so many places in Aruṇācala Stuti Pañcakam, Bhagavan indicates that Aruṇācala is our own self. He, perhaps nowhere so explicitly as in the second sentence, in the second verse of Aruṇācala Pañcaratnam, he very clearly says, you are always shining in the heart as I. Therefore, your name is heart. So, so long as we take ourselves to be a body, Aruṇācala Shiva seems to be the form of a hill. But what we are seeing outwardly as a form of a hill, the reality of that form is what is shining in our heart as I. So if we read Aruṇācala Stuti Pañcakam, what Bhagavan has written there, Bhagavan is the dualistic devotion and the non-dualistic devotion are so skillfully interwoven there. There are so many verses. We can take it either as a dualistic devotion or as non-dualistic devotion. Bhagavan left it open for both interpretations. And both interpretations are fitting according to our state of mind. That's why whenever anyone asks Bhagavan to explain the verses of Aruṇācala Stuti Pañcakam, or particularly the verses of Aksharamlai, Bhagavan avoided doing so. when Murugan was writing a commentary on Aksharamala, and there were some verses, even he couldn't decide what Bhagavan actually meant there. And when he went and he asked Bhagavan, what did you actually mean here? Bhagavan said, the fellow who wrote this has gone away. If you want me to decide the meaning for it, I have to break my head. You may as well break your head and give your own meaning. So Bhagavan avoided giving meaning because he didn't want to limit it. If Bhagavan had said, this verse means such and such, it would mean it would imply all other meanings are wrong. That is different at different times, different meanings may reveal themselves. So Bhagavan left it open to others to interpret. Because there's always, there's no such thing as a definitive interpretation. There's always scope for more fresh meanings to come out. And Bhagavan will reveal those fresh meanings from within. So though Bhagavan said in verse 8 of Upadēśa Undiyār, rather than Anya Bhava, and Anya Bhava is best among all, the transition from the Anya Bhava to the Ananya Bhava is not just that is the line between them is not such a clear-cut line. A lot of devotion is hovering between the two. It's got elements of Anya and elements of Ananya, elements of Anya and elements of Ananya. And they go together perfectly well. Does that adequately answer that?
Yeah, I think it does. I'm just wondering whether everybody knows what Anya and Ananya are.
Anya means other. What is other? So Anya Bhava means the meditating. Well, in that context, it means meditating on God as other. It can also, Bhava can also mean attitude. So it can also mean the attitude that God is other. Whereas Ananya means not other. What is not other than ourselves? Only ourself is not other than ourselves. So Ananya Bhava means meditating on ourselves. And he says there, Abanaham ahum Ananya Bhava. That means Ananya Bhava in which he is I. That's in which God is nothing but I. So when we meditate upon the Ananya Bhava means meditating only on I, with the conviction that God is nothing but I.
Michael, in terms of devotion, something struck me about 20 years ago, when Ranjit Maharaj, I don't know if you know him, he was a sort of a Guru Bhai of Nisargadatta, and I think he was supposed to be but he was very quiet and only later taught after Nisargadatta died. So he had come to London actually. And, he was very humble in his 70s. He continued working until people just came and wanted him to teach after Nisargadatta died. So somebody asked him about devotion because they used to do the singing 3 times a day. And he said, well, yes, the thing is that you are whatever you are, but then you also carve out, there's no one to carve out, but nevertheless, in your everyday practice, you carve out this devotional aspect, because otherwise, it gives this rasa, this taste, it's just sort of the human thing. And I remember once Bhagwan saying as well that yes, I'm not sure what the translation, but yes, of course you are that, non-dual, etc. But but in the everyday world, you still don't behave as if everything is non-dual in the sense that somebody would crack a coconut on his head or something. So it's just this practicality,
yes.
And the emotional aspect of it, which makes life just everyday illusional, illusory things. Even just
whenever anyone criticized Murti Upasana, that is worshipping of form, Bhagavan would always say, we are all, that is, I think there was on one occasion some Muslim devotees came to Bhagavan and they said, Bhagavan, isn't it wrong to worship God in form when God is formless? Bhagavan said, yes, definitely, idol worship is definitely wrong. But first you should give up your own idol worship before you criticize other people's idol worship. And they say, no, we never worship idols. We are very strict Muslims. Bhagavan says, just like the devotee, what is the devotee doing in the temple? They're taking that statue or that stone, that linga or whatever it is, they're taking that to be God. And what do? They give it a bath, they give it clothing, they offer food, all these things. What are you doing every day? You're giving your body a bath. Just like you say that stone is not God, but this body is not you, but you are worshiping it as if it's you. You're giving it a bath, you're putting on nice clean clothes, you're giving it nice tasty food. You're worshiping this body as I. What is wrong with the devotee worshiping the idol as God? So Bhagavan said, in verse 4 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan said, Uruvam Tanayin Ulhu Paramatran. If oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. So long as we experience ourselves as a form, we cannot experience the formless God. So we may as well accept God as a form. And he says in Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, Ninaya Nuruvena, when I approach you as thinking of you as having a form, you stand as a hill on earth. So, but when I look within to see who has seen, then I saw the seer disappear. So it's, oh no, sorry, I'm mixing up two verses here. But anyway, the point is, Bhagavan accepts, but so long as we identify ourselves with a form, it's appropriate to worship God in form. It's better to understand that God is what is in us and turn the mind within. But so long as the mind is going outwards, it is good to worship God in form. It's appropriate to worship God in form.
Because one may sort of put less attention
to ourselves. God is in effect something other than ourselves. It's only when we turn within that we can see God is nothing but ourselves.
Because when we are worshipping a form, even, it's taking our mind away from this attachment to the body for a little while. So it's a little bit of a dissolution of that identification.
It's a focus for our devotion.
Yeah. And then it can become wider. Okay. Thank you, Michael.
It has its place. All this dualistic devotion has its place. But we've got to slowly shift from the dualistic devotion to the non-dualistic devotion. But even when our devotion, like Bhagavan's devotion to Aruṇācala was certainly non-dualistic, but we saw a dualistic expression of it. Bhagavan used to look out of the window, and people said you could see in Bhagavan's eyes the love that he had for Aruṇācala. And the very last thing, shortly before he left his body, when the devotees started singing Aksharam, he opened his eyes for the last time and his eyes shone and tears were coming from his eyes. But the tears were not coming from the inner eye, they were coming from here, which apparently is the indication of tears of joy.
Oh, I don't know.
So much love Bhagavan had for Aruṇācala. So we should never look down on dualistic devotion. It has its place.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay. Marianne, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Hello, Michael. Can you hear?
Yes, I can hear.
I don't know quite how to put this. It's a similar question to what was asked before about the person who was talking about getting stressed at work. I've just been writing a few notes about what you've been saying. I get get so many negative thoughts and so much irritation. And I know that you can't really use techniques. I mean, you have to use your own understanding to try to overcome that. But in the moment, for example, if somebody's irritating me, I tell myself, okay, it's nothing to do with them, it's me. So I try to look within, and as you say, cling to self-attentiveness. But how can I cling to self-attentiveness in that moment? I mean, what I do is I kind of say to myself, that's not real. Try and look at the part of yourself which is, not doing this, beyond the mind. But that seems to be quite an intellectual thing that I'm doing also. And it doesn't seem to work very well, because it might work for a few seconds and then, and so you say curb the rising of the ego, but the thing is you do need that more solid sense of self before you can do that, don't you? So I don't know what I'm asking really, but
I think I
find it very hard.
I think I understand what you're saying. When a child is learning to walk, it falls so many times. Every time it tries to stand up, it falls down. But have you ever seen a child giving up and deciding that it can't walk? If a child is driven by its very nature to continue trying, and eventually it will learn to walk. We are exactly like a small child learning to walk. When we try to cling to self-attentiveness, we cling for a few moments and then we fall down again. So, but we need just to continue trying. It doesn't matter how many times we fail, how many times we allow our mind to drag us outwards and to get upset about situations and people and all these things. The only thing we can do, however many times we fall, we just have to get up and try again. So this is all part of the process of sadhana, of spiritual practice. Of course, we're constantly failing. Time and time again, we're failing. We're trying to hold on to that I. We hold on for a few moments, and then again, something carries us away. And but so long as we are trying, we're on the right track. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter how many times we fail. The road to success is paved with failure, as they say. That applies to worldly matters. It applies equally to spiritual matters. We have to fail 1,000 times in order to succeed once. So let us continue trying, just not giving up. We should never be disheartened by our failure, because why are we making this effort? Why are we trying? Some force has, some higher power driving us to keep on trying. That higher power will certainly succeed. That higher power is the power of grace, the power of love. That will not fail. So however many times we fail, eventually success will be ours. Is that at all helpful?
Yes, thank you, Michael. Thank you. I think, my tendency is to give up. Give up.
Yeah, we all, giving up is the easy option. But then we can't be happy, can we? We know this life is not satisfactory. So again, we come back to it again. However many times we try to give up, we're neither able to do it, nor are we able to give up doing it.
Right, exactly.
So
thank you.
We are the prey in the jaws of the tiger. We cannot escape.
Yes.
The more we cooperate, the less painful it will be. The more we struggle, the more uncomfortable it will be for us. So we've got to yield ourselves more and more.
Thank you, Michael.
And Manek, you've got a question?
I had two questions. You've already answered one about Aruṇācala.
Right.
Just 1 minute. Sorry. My question is actually very similar to what Marianne asked just now, but I'll all the same repeat it. Why is it that after practicing self-inquiry for so many years, we still experience emotions like anger, hatred, and intolerance? When such emotions come up, does it take us a few steps back on the spiritual journey? And sometimes those are the times when, at least I feel that I don't deserve to do self-inquiry, that how come these thoughts are even coming in my mind? So I think you've almost answered the question when you spoke.
I'll answer the first question first, whether you deserve it or not. If you're aware that I am, you deserve to know who you are. So we're all aware I am, so we all deserve to do this. Regarding the first question about why all these emotions like anger, hatred, intolerance, why it continues arising. If you've got sometimes the analogy is used of churning, the churning of the nadis, they say in yoga. We don't have to worry about the nadis, but basically when we are trying to turn our attention towards I, we are churning all the vasanas that are existing in our heart. So they do come up to the surface. Sometimes when people ask Bhagavan similar questions, he said, of course, in meditation, all that is inside has to come out, because unless it comes out, you cannot let go of it. So when we are trying to turn our attention within, or even when we're not trying to turn our attention within, during other times, so many vasanas are arising. At every moment we are faced with a choice. Either we allow our mind to be swept away by its vasanas, feeling angry or hatred or intolerance or whatever it may be, or whatever, just wandering behind so many unnecessary thoughts. We either have a choice to do that, or we have a choice to cling to I. The more we cling to I, the more we weaken those Vishaya vasanas. The more we allow our mind to be carried away by the Vishaya vasanas, the more we perpetuate them. You ask, when such emotions come up, does it take us a few steps back in the spiritual journey? Since there is no going back, once we've started on this path, we cannot but go forward. But the more we turn our mind within and thereby avoid letting ourselves be carried away by our vasanas, the faster is our progress. We're constantly allowing our mind to be to wander under the sway of its vasanas, as Bhagavan often said. We are perpetuating that. The more we cling to I, the more we are weakening those vasanas. So let's not worry about our failures. We all fail. Day after day after day we're failing, but at least for a few moments here and there, let us cling to self-attentiveness. Every moment of self-attentiveness, we are taking one step forward. So we cannot start on this path without eventually succeeding. So we've all started on this path. Let us not, we can't even give up. We may think we can give up, but we can't. Because once we've had a taste of this, once we've heard Bhagavan's teachings and been drawn to this path, nothing else will satisfy us. Whatever distractions we allow, however much we allow our mind to be distracted away by other thoughts, concerns about the world or whatever it may be, nothing is satisfying. Only satisfaction we can find is within ourselves. So we'll be drawn back to this again and again and again. So let us cling as much as we can to I. And let's not worry about however many times we get carried away by our vasanas. Okay, we've been carried away. Cling to I again. Bhagavan said, without lamenting, oh, I'm such a sinner, how can I be saved? If one would cling firmly to self-attentiveness, one will certainly be saved. So that's all that's necessary, to keep on trying. Bhagavan often used to say, perseverance alone is the sign of progress. Because the more we are trying, that is, our perseverance is the measure of our bhakti, our love, just to be as we actually are. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Michael. Yes, I.
And then Michael, you've got your hand raised. Michael D.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for these talks. There's lots of pearls of wisdom in there. Yeah, forgive me if I'm a bit slow. I just have a bit of concussion from a recent car accident. I'm pretty sure it was down to my Pararabdha. I was just going to ask, how does Bhagwan depict Maya, and how are Maya and this phantom ego connected? It seems this phantom has a will of its own to survive. As you once said recently in one of your talks, when a tiger is cornered, it fights fiercely to survive.
Yes.
Could you just elaborate a bit on that? I might ask another question, depending on you.
Maya is nothing but ego. As Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. So what we call Maya is nothing but ego. What Bhagavan gave a very novel interpretation to the word Maya. That is, he gave an etymology for the term, which may or may not be the original etymology, but it's an etymology that is very revealing of what is meant by Maya. That is, Bhagavan said, Maya is Ya Ma. Ya is the feminine form of what? And Ma is a negative. So Ya Ma means what is not. So Maya means what is not, or she who is not. That Maya is generally, but Maya is a power, a Shakti, and Shakti is generally considered as feminine. Maya is generally personified as feminine. So that's why the feminine ending, yeah. But basically Maya means what is not, what doesn't exist. So that is ego. Ego doesn't actually exist. Ego, so long as we look away from ourselves, look at anything other than ourselves, we seem to be ego. But when we look back at ourselves, has anyone ever seen a thing called ego? Ego seems to exist only so long as we don't look at ourselves. When we look at ourselves, we don't find anything as ego. If we look at ourselves keenly enough, all that remains is just pure awareness. That is awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. That is what alone is real. But so long as we look away from ourselves, even the things that we are looking at away from ourselves, they have our own projections. They don't exist independently from ourselves. So the whole of Maya is nothing but ego. Bhagavan often used a term, Murugan often used it in Guru Vachaka Kavaya and in other verses, Manamaye. Manamaye means the mind, Maya, the mind. Mind here means ego, that the root of the mind, the essence of the mind is ego. So Maya is nothing but the ego.
And, this ego, can it be, I know it doesn't exist, but on some energetic level,
it seems to exist.
Yeah, on the energetic level, within this dreamed sort of reality, it seems to have an energetic presence. Just to sort of give an example, like during some meditations, you know, coupled with self-inquiry and stuff, I felt some sort of waves of illumination coming over the body, some shocking, and I felt some breathing happen, sort of erratic, and it seemed that this ego, this phantom sort of energy was, you know, it was all happening on its own. I wasn't intending this to happen, and it seemed to be leaving through the breath, and I was feeling, you know, very good afterwards, and the state of awareness, being aware of itself, followed. So I was just wondering, on some level, it seems to have, although it is illusory, some kind of, on this, maybe within the sheaths, you were saying, some presence. That's why I was asking the question.
That is, ego is a power. Bhagavan often described it as an Adiseya Shakti. That is an extraordinary power. In the 4th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, he begins by saying he begins by saying what is called mind is an Adiseya Shakti, but exists in Atma-swarupa. Atma-swarupa means the real nature of ourselves, what we actually are. So the mind is an Adiseya Shakti, but exists in Atma-swarupa. In verse 6 of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, he refers to the same Adiseya Shakti. He says, addressing Aruṇācala, who is Atma-swarupa, he says, it exists in you as not other than you. So this is that Adiseya Shakti is Maya Shakti, the power of Maya. So yes, the mind is a power. It's the power that brings all this, the whole universe is brought into existence only by this power called ego. It's brought into existence and it's sustained only by ego. So ego is a great power, but what is the relationship between that power of Maya and the original power, which is the power of being, the power of our own real nature? Bhagavan has said, in one verse, Bhagavan wrote a verse on Shakti and Shanti. And he said, what appears as Shakti when looking outwards is found to be Shanti. Shanti means peace. What appears to be power looking outward is found to be peace when we look inwards. The peace itself is a great power, but the difference between the power of peace and the power of all this manifestation, Sadhu sometimes used to give a very nice analogy. He said, if you've got a dam, a very strong dam, it's holding all that water there. There's such a tremendous power in that water, but when we see the reservoir, it's perfectly calm and peaceful. But if there's a crack in the dam and the water begins leaking out, then we see the power that is stored there. The power starts forcing its way out through the concrete, and as it forces its way out, it makes the hole bigger and bigger, and more water rushes, and it comes out of the dam, and it floods the valley and destroys so many things in its way. So which power is greater? The power of stillness, when the dam is perfectly intact, or when that power is released to manifest? The greatest power is the power of being. It is only because of a weakness that there's all this manifestation occurs. So the rising of ego, of the power of the wonderful, extraordinary power called ego, is actually a weakness. Though ego uses its power to create all this vast universe and to sustain this vast universe, that power is a result of weakness. The original power, the real power, is not this power of creation, but the power of just being as we actually are.
Okay, that's very encouraging. Would you say then Maya is our own creation, the self's creation? It's
Not
imagination.
Creation.
No.
The self, and by the self you mean what we actually are, our real nature.
Yeah.
Our real nature doesn't create anything. It doesn't do anything. It just is as it is. What has created all this is only ego. It's only when we rise as ego that all this world comes into existence. This world doesn't actually exist. It's a mere appearance. But it appears in whose view? Not in the view of our real nature. Pure awareness is never aware of anything other than itself. What we actually are is just pure awareness. But it's only when we rise as ego that we project and perceive all of this. This is all just a dream, as Bhagavan said. Who is the dreamer? The dreamer is not our real nature, it's not the self. The dreamer is only ego. So it's only when we rise as ego that we dream all this, this vast universe.
Yeah. And finally, I don't know, you might have to repeat yourself because maybe I'm going over the same thing.
Don't worry, I'm repeating myself all the time because so it's all a matter of repeating the same thing again and again.
Yeah, I mean, it could be my imagination or something, but it seems like, well, the question is you said Maya is some kind of force, the ego force, and there is a Shakti to it. So does it work as a collective through other people's, I mean, I'm using the word others, and for other people's minds as well?
Exist in whose view?
1 second, let me just get the question out. Does it sort of exist as a collective? As in a sense, the self is one and collective, isn't it? You could say it's collective, well, it's one. Is my ego also like a collective, and does it have its like own intelligence? Now, the reason why I'm asking this is because it seems like when I'm in a good state, where I'll just leave it as a good state, it seems sometimes that you know, somebody might just come and out of the blue in my face kind of thing, and I'm thinking like, where did that come from? And it seems like there's maybe it's my imagination, like Maya has, I don't know, maybe some kind of intelligence, and it can work through other people to stop you from going further in your progress towards you know, what Bhagwan's teachings are about, the self.
Yes, that is
finding himself.
That is Maya is the power that draws our attention outwards. As I said, Maya is nothing but ego, but the nature of ego is to always attend to things other than itself. So when we are trying to turn our attention inwards, we are, so to speak, swimming against the current. The natural flow of the ego of the mind, of the attention, is out away from ourselves towards other things. Now we are trying to turn it back within. So yes, Maya will in so many ways find so many ways to distract our attention away from ourselves. That is why great bhakti means love, great love is required.
So 1 second, so Maya has its, you just said Maya will attempt to, so it is a kind of intelligence behind this Maya.
Yes, but that Maya, remember that Maya is nothing other than you. You, the ego, are Maya.
Yeah.
And as ego, that is the very nature of ego, as I explained earlier what Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu about ego. Grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes. So grasping things other than itself is the very nature of ego. That is the very nature of Maya, is the outward flowing, that outward going flow of our attention. Maya naturally draws us away from ourselves. But that Maya is not something other than ourselves. It's our own ego, our own liking to be aware of other things that is drawing us. So we shouldn't think of Maya as something other than ourselves, some power, but it is nothing but ourself as ego that is creating all these problems for us. So we ourselves.
So there's no like battle going on between, you know, good and evil kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, good and evil both exist within us. Our liking just to turn within and to be as we actually are, that is good. All our liking to go outwards, that is all the demons within us. So the battle between good and evil, it's not, we may see it reflected in the external world, but the real battle between good and evil is going on in our own heart, within our own will, between our love to turn within and our desire and attachment to go outwards.
Yeah.
And regarding what you were asking about collective,
yeah.
As you say, the self, our real nature is one. So in the case of where there's only one, there's no need for collective. Collective implies that there are many things.
Yeah.
Those many things seem, as Bhagavan says, when ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. So all multiplicity, all plurality comes into existence only when we rise as ego. So it's only in the view of ourself that all this multiplicity exists. So when you said about others, that's why I asked, in whose view do those others exist? Now we see a world full of so many people. Even in a dream, we see a world full of so many people. So long as we're dreaming, we think all those other people are seeing the same world as us. And if you ask someone in the dream, do you see this world? They say, of course I see the world. So it seems to us that there are many, because we as ego take ourselves to be a person, we take every person to be an ego. And an ego means a perceiver of the world. So it seems to us that there are many perceivers in a dream. But when we wake up from a dream, we say, oh, all those people we saw in the dream, including the person we mistook ourselves to be, were all our own mental projection. Likewise, according to Bhagavan, our present state is just a dream. So all the people in this world, including Michael D, who's asking these questions, and Michael J, who's giving the answers, all are our own mental projection. There is only one perceiver. There is only, in a dream, there is only one dreamer. It's in the dreamer identifies itself with one person in the dream and sees many other people and assumes those many other people are seeing the same world. But they all exist only in the view of the one dreamer. So that one dreamer is ego. What we need to do is to investigate, who am I, this dreamer? Who am I who am dreaming all this? When we turn our attention away from what we are dreaming, back towards ourselves, the one who is dreaming it, the dreamer then comes to an end, the ego is dissolved, and what remains is just pure awareness, which is what we actually are.
Yeah, it's great. It's great how it unfolds. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Michael. It's a
that love that draws us to turn within, that is the power of grace. Grace is nothing but the infinite love that we, as we actually are, have for ourselves as we actually are. So our own self-love is what manifests as grace. Grace and Maya are not two separate powers. They're one and the same power, but because there is only one, there's never more than one. But when that power is facing outwards, we call it Maya. When that power is drawing us back within, we call it grace. So we need to yield, we need to, in order to extract ourselves out of the clutches of Maya, this ego, we need to yield ourselves, surrender ourselves to the power of grace, which is the power of turning within.
Thank you, Michael. That was great.
And Bhavani, you have another question?
Dr. Murali has been there for a while, Michael.
Okay. Oh, okay.
He came on early.
Okay, maybe he went off and came on again.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay. So, well, Murali, let's start with your question. Dr. Murali, are you? Okay, then.
That solved that one.
Yes. Okay, Bhavani, please, you had a question.
Vanakkam. This is Bhavani's daughter, Arini. I was also listening to the wonderful discourse, so thank you very much.
Right.
The question that I think my mom and I have both had, and this is something that we've tried to discuss and dissect a bit, is the concept of no mind, and how does one realize that they are in a state of no mind, and be able to recognize that, and not sort of allow or not start to wonder if the mind is creating this sort of.
It is the mind that is creating all this. So long as we.
Ambulate.
Shall I answer? Can you hear me? Yeah. That is. It is the mind or ego that is creating all of this. So long as we're looking outwards, in effect, the mind seems to exist. Ego seems to exist. But when we look within, when we look to see what we actually are, we will find we are not this ego or mind. We are just pure awareness. This can be explained in terms of the snake rope analogy. If we see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, so long as we don't look at it closely enough, it will seem to be a snake. So we'll feel fear of it and everything. But if we look at it very closely, what will we see? We'll see, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. Likewise, so long as we are looking outwards, away from ourselves, we seem to be this ego or mind. But if we look back and look at ourselves very closely, we will see, oh, and what I mistook to be this ego or mind is actually just pure awareness. That is how we experience the non-existence of mind. Bhagavan explained this very clearly in verse 17 of Upadēśa Undiyār. He said, Manatin uruvei maravadu chava, manamenamondrile undipara, magam nerakumid undipara. Manatin uruvei means the form of the mind. That means we can take it as ego, the essential form of the mind. Manatin uruvei maravadu chava. Maravadu means without, not forgetting. That means without allowing our attention to be distracted away towards other things. That's what it implies by not forgetting. My uchava, when we investigate, so when we investigate the form or the nature of the mind, without forgetting, that if we uninterruptedly attend to ourselves, manamenomondrile, there's no such thing as mind. So it's only by turning our attention back towards ourselves, by investigating ourselves, that we can experience, but there is no such thing as mind at all. But that is when we look at the snake very carefully and see that it's a rope. As soon as we see that it's a rope, we thereby recognize that there never was a snake. Likewise, if we look at ourselves keenly enough, if we attend to ourselves keenly enough and see what we actually are, then it will be very clear to us that there never was any such thing as mind. But so long as we are looking outwards, away from ourselves, mind does seem to exist.
Thank you. I think we were, when one does look within, I think one of the questions that's come up periodically for myself and those around me is, when one is looking within, what are they, the mind will create a picture, and how do we recognize that, if the mind is blank? Like, is this something that the mind created, or are we in a state of no mind?
So mind is creating pictures. The pictures are outside. There's something other than ourselves. So we are not looking within, or we're not looking within keenly enough. The more, so any picture, any phenomenon is something other than ourselves. Who is the one who is aware of that image or picture? So we need to be constantly turning our attention deeper and deeper and deeper within.
Right. And I think if there is no picture, so there it's you know, there's a blankness.
Yes.
Even
blankness is it's a mental label we've given it, blankness.
Yes.
We're not looking for blankness. We're looking for who am I? Let's not put any labels on it. We just want to see who we actually are.
Understood.
It's the mind that judges, oh, this is a blankness. What does blankness mean? It means an absence of phenomena. But because we're giving it another label, it's another subtle form of phenomena. Even the blankness is because now do you experience blankness? No. So blankness is something that has appeared. So what we are looking for is not for something that appears and disappears. Phenomena appear and disappear, but blankness appears and disappears. But in whose view do all these appear? They appear in my view. So who am I? So we need to be constantly turning our attention deeper and deeper and deeper within. What we are looking for is not for anything that appears or disappears. We're looking for that which is ever present, ever shining, ever clearly known by us. Bhagavan often said, jnana is not a new knowledge or awareness to be attained. Anything that is attained newly, whatever comes will go. So we are not looking for anything that is any new experience. We are looking for that which is ever constant, ever available, ever shining, ever clearly known by us. That is I am.
All right, thank you very much, sir. And that was very enlightening. So we appreciate your answer.
Okay. Okay. Amit, you also had your hand raised earlier. Do you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Michael, for taking the question at 5. My question was relating to prarabdha and manonasa. Does prarabdha determine manonasa? It's also connected to, after reading that article that was referred to, saying that it is that the yoni will continue until prarabdha of the body and the body comes to an end, but the yoni is not affected. And it's also body and mind. Ayanis will associate a body and a mind. But yeah, from the perspective of the yoni, there is no body or mind.
Yes, yes. Well, firstly, manonasa has absolutely nothing to do with prarabdha. Prarabdha is the fruit of karmas. And karma, as Bhagavan says, cannot give liberation. So manonasa is something that is completely independent of prarabdha. But prarabdha that has been ordained for us, the prarabdha that will be most conducive to our turning our mind within. Prarabdha can help only up to that much. Bhagavan creates the circumstances that are most favorable for us by allotting our prarabdha accordingly. But as Bhagavan often said, prarabdha affects only the outward facing mind. So only when we're facing outwards do we experience prarabdha. If we turn our attention within, we are turning away from all phenomena, so we are not affected by prarabdha. So as Bhagavan said, bhakti is the mother of jnana. It's only by the love to turn within and to be as we actually are, but we can experience jnana. Jnana means the pure awareness that we actually are, and thereby destroy the mind. So manonasa is brought about only by turning the mind away from everything outside, which is ordained by prarabdha, back within. Regarding prarabdha for jnani, yes, in many texts it is said, but that though the agamya and sanchita are destroyed for jnani, yet the prarabdha remains for the duration of the body. Bhagavan has written a verse in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham in which he says, saying that prarabdha, that sanchita and agamya will cease, and but prarabdha alone will remain for Vijnani, is a reply given to the questions of others. What he means by the questions of others, those who are not ready to, who are not yet willing to have a deeper understanding. There is a prarabdha for the body of the jnani, but the jnani is not the body or the mind. The jnani is just the pure awareness. So Bhagavan says to repudiate that idea that there's any prarabdha for the body. Bhagavan says if a husband dies, all his three wives become widows. None of them remain unwidowed. So the three wives in this case are the Sanchita, Agamya, and Prarabdha. These are the wives of ego, because the ego is the doer of the Agamya, and the Sanchita is the store of the fruits of those Agamya, and the Prarabdha is those fruit which are destined to be experienced in this life. So they're all, in this analogy Bhagavan gave, they're the three wives of the ego. When ego dies, all the three wives become widows. And in verse 38 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, when we, and I'll just get the verse. Bhagavan says in verse 38 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Vinay mudal nam ayin, vile payan tu pom. That is, if we are the doer of actions, we will experience the resulting fruit. Vinay mudal a endru vinavi, tanne arya, when one knows oneself by investigating who is the doer of action, kartrutvam poi, that is, doership will depart, karmum mundrum karlam, all the three karmas will slip off. That's all the three karmas. Sanchita, Agamya, Sanchita, Prarabdha, all will cease when the doer, the ego, is destroyed. And then he ends by saying, Nitamam mukti nilay. That literally means the state of liberation which is eternal. That implies this is the state of liberation which is eternal. So when we investigate what we actually are, all the three karmas will come to an end. Because karmas are related only to ego. And when we know what we actually are, ego is destroyed. But whatever karmas the ego does, it cannot thereby bring about its own destruction. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 2 of Upadēśa Undiyār, vidu tarile, that is, karma will not give liberation. And in Sanskrit he says, gati nirodhakam, action obstructs liberation. So we have to go beyond karma. How can we go beyond karma? So long as our attention is facing outwards, we are engaged in action. That is the very directing of our attention outwards is an action. And when our attention goes outwards, it's when we rise as ego, but our attention goes outwards. When we turn our attention back within, that is not an action, that is a cessation of action. The more keenly we attend to ourselves, the more ego subsides. And it is only in the state of being that we attain liberation, not in the state of doing anything. That's why Bhagavan often used to say, liberation cannot be attained by doing anything, just by being as we actually are. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Michael. And I'm so blessed to have Bhagavan's grace. And
then, Dr. Murali, would you like to write your question in the chat? And then I can, okay, I see. Okay, I can see you've written it. You say, hello, sir. My question is, I'm trying to clear all my vasanas, but sometimes I'm getting back to my old habits. Can you guide me in this regard? Vasanas doesn't just mean habit. Vasanas means our inclination. Well, the term, the vasanas we need to be concerned about are what Bhagavan calls Vishaya vasanas. That means our inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves. How can we clear these? As Bhagavan said, the most effective means, we cannot get rid of them completely so long as ego is there. But the more we turn our attention within, the more we are weakening the Vishaya vasanas. So Bhagavan has given us very clear guidance in the 10th and 11th paragraphs of Nāṉ Ār. What he says in the 10th paragraph is, even though Vishaya vasanas, which come from time immemorial, rise in countless numbers like ocean waves, they will all be destroyed when Swarupa Dhyana increases and increases. What he means, Swarupa Dhyana means literally meditation or contemplation on Swarupa. Swarupa means our own real nature. So Swarupa Dhyana in effect means self-attentiveness. So the more we attend to ourselves, the more we cling firmly to self-attentiveness, the more vasanas will of their own accord get weakened. Why? Because if we allow our attention to go outwards, we are nourishing and sustaining the Vishaya vasanas. When we cling to self-attentiveness, the Vishaya vasanas are still rising and trying to draw our attention away from ourselves. But the more firmly we cling to self-attentiveness, or as Bhagavan said, the more self-attentiveness increases and increases, implies increases in depth and intensity, the more the vasanas which are trying to drag us outward will lose their strength. And then he says, without giving room even to the doubting thoughts, destroying so many vasanas, is it possible to remain only as Swarupa, as my own real nature? Instead of giving room to that doubting thought, it is necessary to cling tenaciously to self-attentiveness. In Tamil, he says that very, very forcibly. If you know Tamil, he says, Vida Swarupa Dhyanate, Vida Pidiyai Pidikavendam. That's it's tenaciously is the best we can say in English, but it's said in a very, very emphatic way in Tamil. We have to cling so intensely, so tenaciously to self-attentiveness, to Swarupa Dhyana. That's all that's required. That will destroy all vasanas. And then he says, however great a sinner one may be, if instead of lamenting and weeping, I am a sinner, how am I going to be saved? One completely rejects the thought that one is a sinner and is steadfast in self-attentiveness, one will certainly be reformed or transformed. Term he used in Tamil, Avanityamai Urupaduvan. Urupaduvan, again, it's a word we can't really translate adequately into English. The closest means to be reformed or transformed, but it implies we will become what we actually are. We'll attain Swarupa, our own real nature. And then in the next paragraph, the 11th paragraph, he says, as long as Vishaya vasanas exist in the mind, so long is the investigation who am I necessary. As and when thoughts appear, then and there it is necessary to annihilate them by vicharana. Vicharana means self-investigation or self-attentiveness, in the very place from which they rise. What he means by annihilating them in the very place from which they arise, we shouldn't wait for the vasanas to drag us away from ourselves and then try to pull our attention back to ourselves. If we cling firmly to self-attentiveness, we are thereby destroying them in the very place in which they rise. Because as soon as they arise, because we're clinging firmly to self-attentiveness, they're not able to draw our attention away from ourselves, and so they get destroyed then and there. And then he says, in Tamil, Anyate nada dirital veragyam Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. That means not attending to anything other, anything other than ourselves, that means, is vairagya or nirasa. Vairagya means, well, both vairagya and nirasa mean more or less the same. They both mean freedom from desire or desirelessness or dispassion or detachment. And then he says, Tane vida dirital jnanam. Not leaving oneself is jnana. That's jnana means true knowledge or real awareness. So clinging firmly to ourself and thereby not attending to anything else, that is both vairagya and jnana. And then he says, in truth, these two, vairagya and jnana, are just one. And then he gives an analogy. just as the pearl divers tying stones to their waist and sinking pick up pearls that are found at the bottom of the ocean, so each one, sinking deep within oneself with vairagya, may obtain the pearl, the Atma-vichara, the pearl of oneself, the self-pearl. That is the pearl that is oneself. The stone that the pearl diver ties to his waist is an analogy for vairagya. Only if we've got intense vairagya, that willingness to let go, not to attend to anything else and to cling only to ourselves, then only will we be able to sink deep within. And then he says, if one clings fast to uninterrupted Swarupa Smarana until one attains Swarupa, that alone is sufficient. That's a very, very important sentence. In Tamil, he says, Oruvan tan Sarupam, Oruvan tan Sarupate adeyam varayil nirantara Swarupa Smaranaye kai patruvanayin adu andre podum. That alone is sufficient. What he refers to here as Swarupa Smarana, literally it means self-remembrance, but in effect it means the same as Swarupa Dhyana, self-attentiveness. So if we cling fast to uninterrupted self-attentiveness until we attain Swarupa, that means until we merge in our real nature, that alone is sufficient. So nothing else is necessary except clinging firmly to Swarupa Smarana, to Swarupa Dhyana, self-attentiveness. And then he says, so long as enemies are within the fort, they will be continuously coming out from it. If one is continuously cutting down or destroying all of them as and when they come, the fort will eventually be captured. That again, it's an analogy. The enemies here are the Vishaya Vasanas. The fort is our own heart. So the Vasanas are coming out from within us. So if you're besieging a fort, the enemy will keep on trying to come out to break the siege. But if you, as and when the enemy come, that means the Vishaya Vasanas, if we cut them down, that means if we cling firmly to self-attentiveness, if we cut all of them down as and when they come, that means if we cling firmly to self-attentiveness, eventually the fort, that's our own heart, will be captured. In other words, we'll attain our own real state. So this is how Bhagavan says we should deal with vasanas. It's not that we get rid of our vasanas one by one. We can't do that. All we need to do is to cling firmly to self-attentiveness. The more we cling firmly to self-attentiveness, the more the vasanas collectively will lose their strength. We'll have less power to drag our mind outwards. But this is conquering our vasanas because we've cultivated these vasanas, many jemmas, crores of jemmas, we don't know how long. So to wean our mind off its vasanas is not something that we can do all of a sudden. So this process of this self-investigation is a gradual process of weaning our mind off its Vishaya vasanas. I see that you managed to unmute yourself. Do you want to ask anything more in that connection?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm really happy with your answer.
Well, it's not, I haven't answered anything. I just read what Bhagavan said. But if you know Tamil, read Nāṉ Ār, read it again and again and again, because everything we need is there in Nāṉ Ār. That's not to say other works of Bhagavan are important. Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, Upadēśa Undiyār, Pañcaratnam, all are important, but this Nāṉ Ār it's a very, very great treasure. Bhagavan has given us so much, and it's such a deep work.
Yes, sir.
In my case, it was the first work I read of Bhagavan's, just an English translation. It may not even have been a very good English translation, but that's what caught my heart. Once I read that, I thought, this is what I've been looking for. But I've now been studying that for the last 44 years, more than 44 years now, and still I'm finding more and more and more clarity in it. I'm not finding more information. I almost know the whole work by heart, but the more I see, the more I think about it, the clearer and clearer and clearer the message becomes. Everything we need is there in that precious, precious little work that Bhagavan wrote. Originally, it was just question. It was answered that he gave to Shiva Prakash Pillai, but it's the only work that of his own accord he then wrote in the form of an essay, because it's such an important work.